Over 300 protesters gathered near Delhi's Parliament House and chanted slogans including "Tibet was never a part of China and China should leave Tibet." The Dalai Lama, 88, has made the Indian hillside town of Dharamshala his headquarters since fleeing Tibet after a failed uprising against Chinese rule in 1959. Hundreds of Tibetans in exile marched on the streets of New Delhi on Sunday to commemorate the 65th Tibetan National Uprising Day against China. Over 300 protesters gathered near India's Parliament House and chanted slogans including "Tibet was never a part of China and China should leave Tibet." The protesters carried Tibetan flags and photographs of their spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama. The 88-year-old Dalai Lama has made the Indian hillside town of Dharamshala his headquarters since fleeing from Tibet after a failed uprising against Chinese rule in 1959. It was the start of increasingly harsh Chinese rule over the region. India considers Tibet to be part of China, although it hosts Tibetan exiles. The Dalai Lama denies China's claim that he is a separatist and says he only advocates substantial autonomy and protection of Tibet's native Buddhist culture. The Tibetan government in exile in India accuses China of denying the most fundamental human rights to people in Tibet and vigorously carrying out the extermination of the Tibetan identity. The Tibetan Youth Congress, which organized the Delhi protest march on Sunday, said that in 1959, the Chinese Communist regime perpetrated an occupation of Tibet, resulting in Tibetans rising in revolt. Since then, the Chinese regime has resorted to brutal tactics resulting in the deaths of over 1 million Tibetans who peacefully protested against oppressive Chinese rule, it said in a statement. Tibet was incorporated by China in 1950. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning this week said that people in Tibet are living a happy life, in response to UN rights chief Volker Turk's assertion that China was violating fundamental rights. Tibet enjoys social stability, economic growth, solidarity among all ethnic groups and harmony among various religious beliefs, she said. In August, a group of Chinese scholars called for the official use of Xizang as the English name for Tibet, saying it would help reshape the region's image. Additional reporting by Agence France-Presse.
South Korea said on Monday, March 11, it had started procedures to suspend the medical licenses of 4,900 junior doctors who have resigned and stopped working to protest government medical training reforms, causing healthcare chaos. The walkout, which started on February 20, is over government plans to sharply increase the number of doctors, which it says is essential to combat shortages and South Korea's rapidly aging population, while the medics argue it will erode service quality. Nearly 12,000 junior doctors, 93% of the trainee workforce, were not in their hospitals at the last count, despite government back-to-work orders and threats of legal action, forcing Seoul to mobilize military medics and millions of dollars in state reserves to help. The Health Ministry on Monday said it had sent administrative notifications, the first step to suspending the doctors' medical licenses to thousands of trainee doctors after they defied specific orders telling them to return to their hospitals. The government has previously warned striking doctors they face a 3-month suspension of their licenses, a punishment which, it says, will delay their ability to qualify as specialists by at least a year. The government last week announced new measures to improve pay and conditions for trainee medics, plus a review of the continuous 36-hour work period, which is a major gripe of junior doctors. The strikes have led to surgery cancellations, long wait times, and delayed treatments at major hospitals. Seoul has denied that there is a full-blown healthcare crisis, but Chun said that military doctors will start working in civilian hospitals from Wednesday this week. 20 military surgeons along with 138 public health doctors will be assigned to 20 hospitals for 4 weeks, Health Minister Cho Kyu-hong said at a meeting on Sunday. The number of military physicians called on to help so far was only a small fraction of the roughly 2,400 military doctors, according to a Defense Ministry briefing. The government is pushing to admit 2,000 more students to medical schools annually from next year to address what it calls one of the lowest doctor-to-population ratios among developed nations. Doctors say they fear the reform will erode the quality of service and medical education, but proponents accuse medics of trying to safeguard their salaries and social status. Under South Korean law, doctors are restricted from striking, and the health ministry has asked police to investigate people connected to the work stoppage. The plan enjoys broad public support, but a new poll by local media found some 34% of people believe the warring sides should start negotiating properly.
Modi is using India's growing appeal as the world's fastest growing major economy and alternative to China for global supply chains to clinch free trade pacts. In a departure from its protectionist past, India is embracing trade deals in a bid to cash in on shifting global trade alliances. Gautam Nair is preparing to ramp up production at his clothing factory in Gurugram, betting on a surge of orders from brands like Marks & Spencer and next as India pursues more free trade pacts with the rest of the world. Within 3 years, he expects Matrix Clothing's exports to the European Union, EU, and the UK to more than double from current levels. The industry is very excited, Nair, who co-founded the company, said by phone. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government is taking advantage of India's growing appeal as the world's fastest growing major economy and an alternative to China for global supply chains to clinch a number of free trade pacts. India expects its deals with countries from the UK to Australia will help boost its manufacturing and soak up the tens of millions of young people entering the workforce in the years ahead. The latest, and among the most ambitious, was a trade and investment pact signed with 4 European countries, including Switzerland and Norway, on March 10. It signaled India's readiness to take on commitments in areas such as labor, environment and sustainability and gender, topics it had shied away from in the past. It was also the first time India secured an investment commitment of $100 billion over 15 years. In such a deal, India has now signed 4 FTAs in quick succession since 2021 after a gap of about 9 years when no agreements were signed. The latest pact with the European bloc of countries, known as the European Free Trade Association, or EFTA, was hailed by Modi and comes just weeks before elections in which he's seeking to extend his decade in power. Negotiations with the UK and Australia are likely to culminate after the Indian elections in April to May, while talks with Oman have already concluded and an agreement may be signed as soon as this month, people familiar with the matter said, asking not to be identified because the negotiations are private. The hope is that such deals will give a level playing field to India's textile sector, which comprise more than 14% of the nation's annual exports, employs more than 45 million people directly, and contributes more than 4% to gross domestic product. Marine goods, auto and machine parts, chemicals, leather and footwear and gems and jewelry products are also poised to benefit. In a departure from its protectionist past, India is embracing trade deals in a bid to cash in on shifting global trade alliances. Companies from Apple to Samsung Electronics have boosted manufacturing in India, taking advantage of production incentives offered by Modi's government. This is India's big historic moment, probably its biggest opportunity on the world stage since India gained its statehood in 1947, said Alex Capri, a lecturer at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy in Singapore. To seize that opportunity, the South Asian nation must plug infrastructure gaps and improve the ease of doing business by cutting down on overregulation, taxation and red tape. Delhi is pulling out all the stops. They know they must fix this, Capri said. By integrating into global value chains, India can create 80 million jobs by 2030, according to a government report. Geopolitically, New Delhi has been forging deeper ties with G7 nations. Now, it's aiming to align economically as well to compete with countries such as Vietnam and Bangladesh that are also positioning themselves as alternative manufacturing destinations to China. The services sector, which makes up more than half of the nation's GDP, is also expected to get a fillip. The trade deals will help India secure easier access for professionals in sectors including IT, health and accounting. For counterparts, India and its market of 1.4 billion people holds massive appeal. On the sidelines of the 13th World Trade Organization Ministerial Conference last month, EU Trade Commissioner Valdis Dombrovskis noted the willingness to move forward when we know that traditionally India has been a relatively closed market. Tim Ayres, Australia's Assistant Trade Minister, said early results from the interim trade deal showed strong outcomes for businesses and noted the two nations are working toward Phase 2. Yet for all that enthusiasm, roadblocks remain. India and the UK still haven't resolved differences on issues including investment protection, social security agreements and market access for British apples and cheese. At home, there are pockets of resistance too. For instance, the Confederation of Indian Alcoholic Drink Companies has expressed concern over opening up the market without getting reciprocal treatment. Vinod Giri, Director General of the association, said while most of the focus of trade talks has been duty concessions, non-tariff barriers such as maturity requirements for whiskey in the UK and Europe have made Indian beverages uncompetitive. Geary said the UK law requires whiskey be matured for a minimum of 3 years, whereas in warm climates like India's, whiskey matures 3 to 5 times faster than in the colder climates of the UK and EU. Most of our whiskey is unable to hit those markets due to these barriers, and we want them removed, Geary said, adding that the longer maturation condition pushes up production costs by as much as 35%. As long as FTAs are fair and equitable, we have no problem. And many are still finding it difficult to do business in India. While there's a rise in the number of companies mentioning India or Indian investment on earnings calls, that doesn't always translate into commitments, said Deborah Elms, head of trade policy at the Singapore-based Hinrich Foundation. In many cases, the obstacles to investment or development on the ground in India remain significant, she said. These gaps are creating problems for businesses, which means that the positive story around Indian prospects might not be delivered. India's government is aware of the challenge. It's helping states simplify rules, decriminalizing minor offenses and repealing redundant laws. The government has also come out with a single window system to speed up the process of getting approvals and clearances needed by investors while cutting compliance burdens. For Matrix's Nair, he's also tempering his optimism. Companies are wary, because we have been waiting for a long time for the deals to happen, he said. Beijing warns South Korea after remarks on South China Sea clashes. Foreign Ministry urges Seoul to refrain from hyping the issue over confrontations between China and the Philippines. Comments came after South Korea expressed deep concern over recent confrontations at 2nd Thomas Shoal. Beijing on Tuesday warned Seoul to behave cautiously and in a neutral manner over disputes between China and the Philippines in the South China Sea. China's foreign ministry expressed serious concerns in response to comments from its South Korean counterpart about a collision between Chinese and Philippine Coast Guard vessels near the 2nd Thomas Shoal last week. Ministry spokesman Wang Wenbin said South Korea was not a party in the South China Sea disputes, but in recent years had either insinuated or explicitly blamed China over the matter several times. South Korea has shifted from the cautious and neutral stance it had maintained for many years, Wang said. China had always made timely representations and stated opposition to South Korea's criticism, he said. I once again urge South Korea to watch yourself, refrain from following the trend of hyping the issue, and avoid adding unnecessary burdens on China-South Korea relations. Lim Soo-suk, a spokesman for South Korea's foreign ministry, said last Thursday that Seoul was deeply concerned about the dangerous situation and use of water cannons against the Philippine vessels in the South China Sea. We support the maintenance of peace, stability and a rules-based order in the South China Sea, as well as the freedom of navigation and overflight based on the principles of international law, including the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, Lim said. South Korea's embassy in Manila also voiced concerns on its social media account. The remarks came after yet another clash between China and the Philippines last Tuesday near the 2nd Thomas Shoal, a recurring flashpoint between the two sides over the last year. The Philippine Coast Guard accused a Chinese vessel of ramming and damaging one of its ships, and injuring 4 Filipino crew members with water cannons. The Philippine ships had been sent to resupply military personnel stationed on a wrecked ship that was intentionally scuttled on the reef in 1999. Chinese ships have continuously blocked the resupply efforts, resulting in frequent confrontations. Wang defended the Chinese intervention, saying the incident was caused by the violation of China's territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests by the Philippines. The Chinese side took the necessary control measures in accordance with the law and operated professionally with restraint, reasonably and legitimately. The responsibility for the incident lies entirely with the Philippine side, he said. The 2nd Thomas Shoal, known as Renai Jiao in China and Eungan Shoal in the Philippines, is an uninhabited reef located within the 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone of the Philippines. China claims sovereignty over the reef as well as the entire Spratly Islands, through a loosely defined 9-dash line. Fast-tracked legislation, which passed 352-65, now heads to Senate, where passage is less clear. U.S. President Joe Biden has said he would sign the bill into law. Should ByteDance fail to sell off the short video app, TikTok would face a ban on operations within the U.S. The U.S. House of Representatives voted 352-65 to pass a bill on Wednesday to force Chinese tech company ByteDance to divest its popular short video sharing app TikTok, lest it face a ban on operations in the U.S. The legislation, which gives ByteDance about 6 months to divest, now heads to the Senate, where Democratic and Republican leaders have sent mixed signals about whether they will support it. Senator Rand Paul, Republican of Kentucky, has said that he will block efforts to pass the bill unanimously. 15 Republicans and 50 Democrats voted against the bill. There was one abstention. U.S. President Joe Biden last week said he would sign the bill into law if it passes both chambers, though the legislation is likely to face litigation even if it becomes law. Previous efforts to restrict TikTok, which date back to 2020, have stalled or been blocked by courts. The bill was introduced on March 5 by the leaders of the House Select Committee on China, including Representative Mike Gallagher, a Wisconsin Republican, and unanimously passed through the House Energy and Commerce Committee last Thursday. The fast-tracked bill also establishes a process for the president to designate other apps controlled by foreign adversary countries to face restrictions on operations in the U.S. Lawmakers have expressed concern about TikTok's potential to surveil and manipulate Americans through collection of their personal data and algorithm modifications. Companies controlled by a foreign adversary would always choose the path for more control, more surveillance and more manipulation, said Washington Republican Kathy McMorris Rodgers, chair of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, on Wednesday. And in the case of TikTok, we wouldn't even know it. In response, House critics of the bill, ranging from progressives like New York Democrat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to MAGA, Make America Great Again, supporters like Georgia Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene, expressed dangers of emulating China's censorship system and singling out TikTok among social media apps to target. California Democrat Ro Khanna earlier this week gathered with TikTok users from across the country in front of the U.S. Capitol building to oppose Gallagher's bill. He has argued for an Internet Bill of Rights instead of what he described as hurting creators and organizers seeking to challenge the political establishment. Khanna was the only member of the House Select Committee on China to vote against the bill on Wednesday, with New Jersey Democrat Andy Kim not voting. Other notable nays on Wednesday included Connecticut Democrat Jim Himes, lead Democrat on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, and Massachusetts Democrat Jim McGovern, a frequent commentator on China's human rights record. For its part, TikTok has argued that efforts to restrict it would hamper the free speech of 170 million Americans who use the short video platform. According to the Washington Post, the company rekindled negotiations in September with the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S., a Treasury-led interagency group that reviews foreign transactions, to institute a plan restricting foreign access to American user data. Called Project Texas, the $1.5 billion plan would cede authority over TikTok's American operations to a 3-person board selected by CFI US. That board would run a subsidiary called US Data Security, which would handle all of the app's critical functions in the United States, including user data, engineering, security and content moderation. But lawmakers have remained unconvinced, telling TikTok's chief executive Xu Zhiqiu that only a ban or divestiture would be acceptable. Xu landed in Washington on Tuesday to make an appeal to senators to oppose the bill, per the Washington Post. Chinese national security laws likely require data from the apps to be handed over on request from government agencies, though TikTok maintains it has neither given American user data to Beijing, nor has Beijing ever asked for it. Responding to free speech concerns from critics, Gallagher has repeatedly contended that his bill was not a ban of TikTok, but meant to force a change in the app's ownership. However, analysts say that the legislation effectively acts as a ban because Chinese government rules prevent the export of software, including the algorithm that serves as TikTok's recommendation engine. Additionally, if ByteDance was forced to divest TikTok US, the acquisition by a US company would also require antitrust approval from the Chinese government, said Paul Triolo of Albright Stonebridge Group, noting that this process typically took much longer than the divestiture period the bill seeks. China's Commerce Ministry said last year that it would firmly oppose a forced sale of the app. Triolo, who specializes in China and tech policy, added that China's national security laws are too vague to conclude that China-based companies must turn over data on request from Beijing. None of the laws in question have implementing regulation that would provide any detail on what the laws actually mean in practice. Free speech advocates, including the American Civil Liberties Union, wrote in a letter to the House Energy and Commerce Committee last week that it does not improve matters to say that this isn't a ban. Generally, the government cannot accomplish indirectly what it is barred from doing directly, and a forced sale is the kind of speech punishment that receives exacting scrutiny from the courts, they wrote, citing a Montana court's decision in November to block the state from banning TikTok. In March 2023, a bipartisan group of senators led by Mark Warner, a Virginia Democrat, pushed a White House-supported effort to give the Biden administration new powers to restrict technologies posing national security risks. Bipartisan criticism has stymied that broadly targeted bill, which did not mention TikTok by name but would have likely affected the app's ability to operate in the U.S. Some senators remained undecided on the most recent effort to restrict TikTok. South Carolina Republican on Sunday said he was conflicted about Gallagher's bill. Others, like Oregon Democrat Ron Wyden and Oklahoma Republican James Lankford, said they still needed to read the bill before deciding. Wyden expressed concern that the bill was moving too fast for a proper assessment of its implications. Warner and Florida Republican Marco Rubio came out in support of the bill on Wednesday and said they would work in a bipartisan manner to push it through the Senate. But Maria Cantwell, the Washington Democrat who chairs the Senate Commerce Committee, said she preferred other legislation to regulate apps. On Monday, presumptive Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump reiterated his newfound opposition to a TikTok ban, which he first made clear last week. He now argues that a ban would only empower TikTok competitor Facebook, reversing his previous efforts to ban the app. Trump reportedly met last month with Jeff Yass, a major TikTok investor and Republican donor, though the former president on Monday denied they had discussed the app. The Biden administration itself has sent mixed signals. While it has prohibited the use of TikTok on federal devices and worked with Gallagher on his bill, Biden's re-election campaign launched its official TikTok account last month. A 2021 report from University of Toronto-based research group Citizen Lab found no overt data transmission by TikTok to the Chinese government, without ruling out the possibility that user data gathered outside China is transferred to the country afterwards. Its analysis was inconclusive about whether TikTok employs political censorship of user posts. It also found that TikTok collected similar amounts of data as other social media platforms like Facebook. TikTok users, for their part, have flooded congressional offices with calls urging to not ban the app. In videos attesting to TikTok's positive impact on their lives, some said Congress was showing bias against the popular app in choosing not to target other social media apps, noting China could access their data through those apps even if TikTok were banned. Others expressed skepticism that the app was manipulating content in favor of China. If China controls TikTok, they're doing an awfully good job of censoring content that is critical of the US government, said one TikTok creator with 1.4 million followers. New York Democrat Jamal Bowman last week posted on his TikTok account that moving towards a ban represented an effort at silencing young people.
Hundreds of people forced to work in an online scam center in the Philippines were rescued in a raid on March 14 that also saw 8 suspects arrested, according to police. Acting on a tip from a Vietnamese man who alleged to have escaped the sprawling compound in Bamban, north of Manila, police said they unmasked an operation where suspected victims of human trafficking were forced into conducting various online scams. Police found 432 Chinese nationals, 371 Filipinos, 57 Vietnamese, 8 Malaysians, 3 Taiwanese, 2 Indonesians, and 2 Rwandans at the site. The 100,000 square meter complex in Bamban was posing as an internet gaming company, according to a police statement. Across Southeast Asia, scam centers have mushroomed, with crime syndicates luring, kidnapping, or coercing workers into predatory online activity. The scam industry is raking in unprecedented sums, the equivalent of billions of dollars, according to the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. Victims have reported traveling across the region, often on the pretense of romance or high-paying jobs, but finding themselves forced instead to cajole people into plowing money into fake investment platforms and other ruses. The Philippines police said a Malaysian worker had also sought help after allegedly being held against his will at the same address in Bamban. At the center, a complex of 36 office buildings and dormitories, the victims were engaged in various online scams under threat of physical harm or other punishment, the authorities said. 8 people are being held as suspects of illegal detention and human trafficking. The Chinese embassy has been asked to help identify the suspects, said Mr. Cruz. Reached for comment, a mission spokesman told AFP the request will be relayed to the Chinese authorities. Mr. Gilberto Cruz, executive director of the crime task force that led the pre-dawn raid, later told AFP an unspecified number of the Filipinos found at the site would be released without charges as they were just there to work as maintenance or security staff. Last year, police detained nearly 3,300 people in 2 large-scale raids on what they said were scamming sites in Manila. A British court ruled on March 14 that Australian computer scientist Craig Wright is not Satoshi Nakamoto, the pseudonym used by the creator of the cryptocurrency Bitcoin when it first launched in 2008. The decision follows a nearly 2-month trial in London's High Court after the Crypto Open Patent Alliance, COPA, a non-profit organisation set up to keep cryptocurrency technology free from patents, sued Mr. Wright over his copyright claims to the Bitcoin white paper. The 53-year-old Mr. Wright has claimed since 2016 that he was Satoshi Nakamoto and insisted he was the author of a white paper that unveiled what would grow to be the world's most popular cryptocurrency. But in his ruling handed down on March 14, Judge James Mellor comprehensively dismissed Mr. Wright's claims, calling the evidence for his decisions overwhelming. Mr. Wright, an enigmatic programmer who has described himself as creator of Bitcoin on social media platform X, has initiated a number of lawsuits over the issue but faced legal action brought by COPA on this occasion. The organization brings together heavyweights in the industry, including cryptocurrency platform Coinbase and Block, which specializes in digital payments. It accused Mr. Wright, nicknamed Fakatoshi by his detractors, of lying about his identity and of forging and manipulating documents to try and prove his claims. The March 14 ruling could impact another lawsuit pitting Mr. Wright against 26 developers, including Coinbase, for allegedly infringing upon his intellectual property rights. Thousands of farmers protested in India's capital on Thursday to press their demand for a new law that would guarantee minimum crop prices, after weeks of being blocked from entering the city. They rode crowded buses and trains instead of their tractors to New Delhi after authorities barricaded highways into the capital with cement blocks and barbed wire. Police also banned use of farm vehicles as a condition for granting permission for the rally in the city. Participants were also barred from carrying sticks or swords to avoid clashes with police. The protesters held placards demanding free electricity for farming. They contended that without minimum price guarantees for their crops, they would be at the mercy of the markets, and that would spell disaster, especially for the more than 2/3 of them who own less than 1 hectare, 2.5 acres of land. The rally, organized by the United Farmers Front, was held at Ramlila Ground, which is used for religious festivals, major political meetings and entertainment events. Police also set a condition for the rally that no more than 5,000 people would participate, the Press Trust of India news agency said. The rally was scheduled to end later Thursday. Chitwant Singh, a protester, said farmers didn't earn enough to cover their costs. The traders and middlemen take away all our profits, he said. The protests come at a crucial time for India, which has a national election in April-May in which Prime Minister Narendra Modi's governing party is widely expected to secure a 3rd successive term. Farmers are a particularly influential voting bloc because of their numbers. More than 60% of India's 1.4 billion people depend on farming for their livelihoods. The farmers are also pressing the government to keep its promises to waive loans and withdraw legal cases brought against them during earlier protests in 2021. Several rounds of talks have failed to break the deadlock. Separately, thousands of farmers have been protesting in Shambhu, a town about 200 kilometers, 120 miles, from the capital, since February 13. Authorities have barricaded highways leading to New Delhi with cement blocks, metal containers, barbed wire, and iron spikes to prevent the farmers from entering the capital. The farmers have brought bulldozers and excavators to try and push through. On February 21, clashes between farmers and police left one protester dead as the farmers tried to resume their march to the capital after talks with the government failed to end an impasse over their demands for guaranteed crop prices. Police said 12 officers were injured after protesters attacked them with sticks and pelted them with stones. The farmers paused their protest and have camped near Shambhu, close to the border between Punjab and Haryana states, as their unions engaged in discussions with government ministers. They rejected a proposal offering them 5-year contracts with guaranteed prices for certain crops including maize, grain, legumes, and cotton. 2 years ago, tens of thousands of farmers camped out on the outskirts of New Delhi for months, forcing Modi to repeal new agriculture laws in a major reversal for his government. Jagjit Singh Dalawal, one of the farmers leading Thursday's protest, said they did not want any violence and condemned the government for the massive security measures. Protest organizers say the farmers are seeking a law that would guarantee minimum prices for 23 crops to help stabilize their incomes. The government protects agricultural producers against sharp falls in farm prices by setting a minimum purchase price for certain essential crops, a system that was introduced in the 1960s to help shore up food reserves and prevent shortages. The system can apply to up to 23 crops, but the government usually offers the minimum price only for rice and wheat. The release of wastewater from Japan's stricken Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant was suspended on March 15 following an earthquake, its operator said while stressing that the move was precautionary. A 5.8 magnitude jolt struck off the coast of the northeastern Fukushima region home to the plant wrecked by a tsunami in 2011 at 12:14 a.m. on March 15, the Japan Meteorological Agency said. Referring to the water release process, Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO, said in a post on social media platform X that there were no abnormalities in the Advanced Liquid Processing System, ALPS, treated water dilution and discharge facility. ALPS removes all radioactive elements from contaminated water except the naturally occurring tritium. Japan's Nuclear Regulatory Authority also said shortly after the quake that no abnormalities were detected at either the crippled Fukushima Daiichi plant or its sister plant Fukushima Daini. In August 2023, TEPCO began releasing into the Pacific Ocean around 540 Olympic swimming pools worth of wastewater that had collected at Fukushima Daiichi since the 2011 accident, one of the world's worst nuclear disasters. The operation has been endorsed by the United Nations Atomic Agency. But China and Russia have criticized the release into the Pacific Ocean and banned Japanese seafood imports, saying that Japan is polluting the environment. Japan experiences hundreds of earthquakes every year, and the vast majority cause no damage. There were no immediate reports of injuries from the latest jolt, and there was no tsunami warning. India has implemented a citizenship law that excludes Muslims, a minority community whose concerns have heightened under Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Hindu nationalist government. The rules for the law were announced Monday. It establishes a religious test for migrants from every major South Asian faith other than Islam. Critics argue that the law is further evidence that Modi's government is trying to reshape the country into a Hindu state and marginalize Muslims. The Citizenship Amendment Act provides a fast track to naturalization for Hindus, Parsis, Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains, and Christians who fled to Hindu-majority India from Afghanistan, Bangladesh and Pakistan before December 31, 2014. The law excludes Muslims, who are a majority in all three nations. It also amends the old law, which prevents illegal migrants from becoming Indian citizens, and marks the first time that India, an officially secular state with a religiously diverse population, has set religious criteria for citizenship. The Indian government has said those eligible can apply for Indian citizenship through an online portal. The implementation of the law has been one of the key campaign promises of Modi's ruling Bharatiya Janata Party before a general election scheduled to be held by May. Modi's government has dismissed arguments that the law is discriminatory. It defends the law as a humanitarian gesture to extend citizenship to religious minorities fleeing persecution and says it would not be used against Indian citizens. The law was approved by Parliament in 2019, but Modi's government held off its implementation after deadly protests in which scores were killed. The nationwide protests drew people of all faiths who said the law undermines India's foundation as a secular nation. Muslims were particularly worried that the government could use the law, combined with a proposed citizenship registry, to marginalize them. The National Register of Citizens is part of the Modi government's effort to identify and weed out people it claims came to India illegally. The register has only been implemented in the northeastern state of Assam, but Modi's party has promised to roll out a citizenship verification program nationwide. Critics and Muslim groups say the citizenship law will protect non-Muslims who are excluded from the register, while Muslims could face deportation or internment. On Monday, human rights watchdog Amnesty India said the law legitimizes discrimination based on religion. The United States also expressed its concern and said it will closely monitor how India implements the law. Respect for religious freedom and equal treatment under the law for all communities are fundamental democratic principles, State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller told reporters at a daily briefing Thursday. Opponents of the law, including Muslims, opposition parties, and rights groups, say it is exclusionary and violates the secular principles enshrined in the Constitution. They say faith cannot be made a condition of citizenship. Some also argue that if the law is aimed at protecting persecuted minorities, then it should have included Muslim religious minorities who have faced persecution in their own countries, including Ahmadis in Pakistan and Rohingyas in Myanmar. To critics, Modi is pushing a Hindu nationalist agenda that threatens to erode the country's secular foundation, shrink space for religious minorities, particularly Muslims, and move the country closer to a Hindu nation. India has a large minority group of 200 million Muslims in its population of more than 1.4 billion. They live in almost every part of India and have been targeted in numerous attacks since Modi assumed power in 2014. Scores of Muslims have been lynched by Hindu mobs over allegations of eating beef or smuggling cows, an animal considered holy to Hindus. Muslim businesses have been boycotted, their localities have been bulldozed and places of worship set on fire. Some open calls have been made for their genocide. Critics say Modi's conspicuous silence over anti-Muslim violence has emboldened some of his most extreme supporters and enabled more hate speech against Muslims. Modi has also increasingly mixed religion with politics in a formula that has resonated deeply with India's majority Hindu population. In January, he opened a Hindu temple at the site of a demolished mosque in northern Ayodhya city, fulfilling his party's long-held Hindu nationalist pledge. Thailand is again considering legalizing casinos to draw investment and tourism, a study submitted to the House of Representatives on March 15 showed, but such proposals have been losing bets in the past because of public disapproval. The only gambling allowed in Thailand is on state-controlled horse races and the lottery. But at least 10% of Thais are addicted to gambling, the study, by a 60-member committee of government and opposition lawmakers, said. Many in the industry believe a legal casino market in Thailand would be a huge success in drawing overseas visitors, providing strong competition for the world's biggest gambling hub Macau, the only place in China where citizens can legally gamble in casinos. Legalization of gambling has been discussed in the past, but no government has gone ahead due to public opposition. In a 2021 opinion poll, 46.51% opposed legalized gambling due to moral and crime concerns, while 21.25% were supportive. The previous parliament approved a similar study in 2023, but the House was dissolved before the cabinet could consider it. Under the proposals in the study, seen by Reuters, private companies would shoulder the cost of construction and operation of entertainment complexes comprising casinos while the government would be responsible for taxing and regulation, Mr. Sorawong Theenthong, vice chairman of the parliamentary committee, told Reuters. Thai and foreign companies with experience on this will be responsible for most of the investment, he said. Mr. Sorawong said an estimated minimum investment for a large complex would be 100 billion baht, $2.79 billion. A draft law on the casino idea is included in the study, which will need parliamentary approval before it is forward to the cabinet for consideration. No number of entertainment complexes or their location are specified, but the committee recommended that a complex should be in a main tourist destination and within 100 kilometers of an airport. Mr. Sorawong said the study could be considered for parliament approval on March 28. We want to conclude the law and start selling licenses to investors within this government, he said. Major general hospitals have requested the government expand low-interest loans for them as the protracted walkout by trainee doctors has disrupted hospital operations, causing billions of won in deficits per day, sources said Friday. The walkout, which has continued for over 3 weeks, disrupted operations of major general hospitals nationwide, reportedly inflicting deficits worth billions of won every day on the Big Five general hospitals in Seoul, including Seoul National University Hospital, SNUH, and ASEAN Medical Center. According to medical circles, both SNUH and ASEAN have incurred daily deficits of about 1 billion won, $751,868 stemming from the aftermath, and SNUH has recently doubled the size of its bank credit line to 100 billion won. Additionally, struggling private general hospitals are seeking government assistance. The ministry's Career Advancing Schools Foundation is currently managing a 60 billion won loan program to help finance construction projects or the purchase of medical facilities and equipment by private university hospitals. The program's yearly interest rate is 2.67%, much lower than the market rate of about 5.22%. The ministry official said, however, the hospital's request cannot be immediately granted because it pertains to a budget issue that requires consultations with the finance ministry. In efforts to combat declining revenues, several general hospitals nationwide have introduced unpaid leave programs and are accepting applications from non-physician staff, such as nurses and personnel in the hospital administrative or technical divisions. Other major hospitals have also reduced their health care services by integrating separate wards or scaling back ward operations. Japan's bar on same-sex marriage is unconstitutional, the High Court in the northern region of Sapporo said on Thursday, March 14, the first such ruling by an appeals court on a matter that has divided the lower levels of the judiciary. While Japan is the only group of 7 nations without legal protection for same-sex unions, the ruling by the Sapporo High Court dismissed the plaintiff's claim for damages from the government. The debate on whether Japan's laws against same-sex marriage are unconstitutional has split lower courts, with one district court holding the bar to be constitutional but others saying it is unconstitutional in varying degrees. Although opinion polls from 2023 show about 70% of the public back same-sex marriage, the conservative Liberal Democratic Party of Prime Minister Fumio Kishida opposes it. Taiwan on March 16 warned off Chinese Coast Guard ships that entered its restricted waters near frontline islands close to China for a second day in a row, as tensions simmer across the sensitive Taiwan Strait. Taiwan's Coast Guard said 4 Chinese Coast Guard boats on March 16 morning entered the restricted waters of Taiwan-controlled Kinmen Islands, which hug the Chinese coast. It said the Chinese boat stayed just over an hour after Taiwan authorities asked them to leave. China claims democratically governed Taiwan as its own territory, over the island's strong objections. It has stepped up military activities near Taiwan in recent years, with almost daily incursions into air defense identification zones. You have entered our country's restricted waters. Please turn around immediately, a Taiwan official said via radio in a broadcast message to their Chinese counterparts, according to footage released on March 16 by Taiwan's Coast Guard. The footage shows a Taiwan Coast Guard boat tracking the movement of 2 Chinese ships in the near distance. The move has seriously impacted traffic and safety. To avoid triggering naval incidents, we urge them to stop such behaviors, Taiwan's Coast Guard said in a statement. There was no immediate comment from China's Coast Guard, which does not have publicly available contact details. China's Coast Guard conducted patrols near the Kinmen Islands on March 15 as well, with 4 Chinese Coast Guard boats being warned away by their Taiwanese counterparts, according to Taiwan's official central news agency. Last month, China's Coast Guard began regular patrols around Kinmen, after 2 Chinese nationals died while trying to flee Taiwan's Coast Guard after their boat entered prohibited waters. Taiwan dispatched Coast Guard boats on March 14 to join a rescue mission at China's request after a Chinese fishing vessel capsized near the Kinmen Islands. Taiwan's government has stressed the importance of cooperation between Taiwan and China amid the heightened tensions. On March 15, Taiwan also sent several boats at China's request to help search for a Chinese fisherman who went overboard near the Taiwan-controlled Matsu Islands, in the northern end of the Taiwan Strait. A senior Taiwan security official, who requested anonymity due to the sensitivity of the matter, told Reuters that Beijing is sending out confusing messages by continuing its harassment of Taiwan, while also asking for Taipei's assistance on dealing with maritime incidents. The official said the latest moves by the Chinese Coast Guard in Kinmen did not carry substantial security threats, but complicated the situation there. We are clueless, the official said. We tried to save their fishermen yesterday, and today they are baring their teeth and claws. Last week, Taiwan's top China policymaking body urged its giant neighbor not to change the status quo in waters near Kinmen by sending Coast Guard boats into restricted areas. Two of Japan's largest teaching unions have submitted petitions to the government signed by nearly 900,000 people, calling for reductions in the long hours of unpaid overtime they are expected to do. The Japan Teachers Union, Nikkyoso, on Wednesday sent a petition with 698,091 names to the Ministry of Education, a month after the All Japan Teachers Union, Zenkyo, filed a similar document with some 180,000 signatures calling for the government to establish a firm plan on how teachers' hours can be cut. The issue of working conditions within Japanese schools is presently being discussed in an expert panel set up in the ministry, with one proposal being a salary increase of 4% if teachers agree not to request pay for overtime hours. Regulations state that teachers cannot be forced to work overtime, although they come under pressure to assist outside classroom hours, such as by taking sports practices at weekends and going on school trips, without being paid. Administrative tasks and the grading of student papers also takes place outside official hours, as do class preparations. The average public school teacher earns around 3.7 million yen, $24,822 a year, rising to 5 million yen, $33,543 per annum after 10 years. According to a report in the Mainichi newspaper last year, teachers at junior secondary schools typically work 11 hours every weekday, with their primary level counterparts clocking 10 hours and 45 minutes each day. Okamoto said teachers joined the profession because they wanted to help children, and for years the educators had gradually been given additional tasks with no reward. The ministry was using the teachers' commitment to the profession against them, she said, because it was confident they would not strike for fear of hurting the children. The stresses of the profession are, however, taking a toll. A study by the ministry released in August last year showed that a record 953 teachers resigned from public schools across Japan in the 2021 academic year, citing mental health complaints. That figure was up 171 cases from the previous high, reported in 2018. The most frequently cited reason for teachers handing in their resignations at primary, junior high, and senior high schools was the long working hours. A separate study showed that a record 5,897 teachers applied to take a leave of absence in 2021 as a result of psychological issues. The ministry also confirmed that fewer people were applying to become teachers, in large part because of the poor conditions, meaning that those who remained in the profession were having to work even harder. The situation is so serious that the ministry announced last year the introduction of grants for counseling for teachers worried about their mental health. A foreign teacher who worked in Japanese schools for 5 years admitted to being shocked at the amount of hours Japanese teachers put in, and the time they were effectively expected to do for free. She was also stunned at teachers not being paid for coaching sports teams or other weekend responsibilities, describing it as forced voluntary hours. Teachers appear to broadly have the support of the public, with recent media coverage attracting angry online comments from readers. One message linked to the TBS News webpage saying, "If the voices of those on the ground are not heard, then this country is doomed." In a statement, Nikkyoso said it was calling on the ministry to act to save schools from the major crisis that is on the horizon, demanding that more teachers be hired to share the burden and the addition of more school counselors. The union also wants bureaucrats to devise ways to optimize their work roles and rethink pay structures. Indian digital payments firm PayTM plans to cut close to 20% of staff at its banking unit amid uncertainty over the unit's future due to a looming central bank deadline for it to halt most operations, two sources said. PayTM Payments Bank has decided to lay off staff in certain divisions, including operations, the sources with direct knowledge of the matter said. The unit had 2,775 employees as of December 2023, data from information provider Traxon shows. PayTM, formerly known as 197 Communications, owns a 49% stake in the bank, which was ordered by the Reserve Bank of India, RBI, at the end of January to stop accepting credit transactions or deposits across products such as savings accounts, prepaid cards and digital wallets by March 15, following persistent compliance breaches. PayTM shares have lost 54% of their value since the regulatory clampdown, in the worst crisis for one of India's largest digital payment firms. A PayTM spokesperson said, "There are no layoffs here." The annual appraisal cycle is underway at the company, which may lead to adjustments based on performance evaluations and role suitability, this spokesperson added. It's crucial to understand that this process is distinct from layoffs. After Friday's deadline, customers who have deposits in the bank's accounts, wallets, and toll tags for paying highways taxes can still access them. But no fresh deposits can be made. PayTM Payments Bank will also still hold a regulatory license unless it is withdrawn by the RBI. It is unclear what purpose PayTM Payments Bank will serve after the business halt, the second source said. Both sources said there had been no update from PayTM on what banking staff would do after the move. PayTM, which had been using its banking unit to back digital payments through its own app, was granted a license on Thursday from the National Payments Corp of India, NPCI, which will allow its customers to continue using the PayTM app for payments through the country's popular Unified Payment Interface, UPI.